Dear Professor Zavyalova, hello one more time. So here are Safar and Abror. Very nice to meet you. So we wanted to ask, is it good if we record it for posting it on social media later if we record the meeting?
That's fine.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. So we may start with the usual process of introducing the guest. It is Silk Road Revival series of podcasts with world-wide feminist economics professor. So today's guest is Anastasiya Zavyalova, and we, the interviewers, would be Safar and Abror. So one more time, really nice to meet you. So I will begin with introducing the guest. So today we're joined one more time by Professor Zavyalova, Associate Dean for Degree Programs and Associate Professor for Strategic Management at the University of Rice, Jones Graduate School of Business. She studies how organizations earn, lose, and repair social approval, things like reputation, stigma, and even celebrity, especially during scandals and crises. Her work includes widely cited studies on how firms should respond after wrongdoing when industry scandals spill over to innocent companies. About the agenda. So in the first part, we will ask you some personal and work-related questions. Then in the second part, we'll focus on one of your works. So I will specifically focus on that work and we'll have a discussion about it, reputation as a benefit and the burden, how stakeholders' organizational identification affects the role of reputation following a negative one. And in the third part, we'll have the work of Abror, which will be managing the message, the effects of firm actions, and industry spillovers on media coverage following wrongdoing. So that's today's agenda. It will take maximum of an hour of your time. One more time, thanks for the contribution. So we're ready to kick off with the questions in part one.
Yeah, so thank you so much for your time. So my first question would be, so your work is in the intersection of strategy and public trust. So here is a follow-up. How firms earn, what moment first made you choose the reputation and crimes this sector as your main focus of the research?
Just to correct, not necessarily public trust, but strategy and what is broadly now referred to as social evaluations. So how company stakeholders make sense of companies. So how do they form perceptions about companies? So trust is a little more specific, and that's something I haven't delved into in my research. But what made me study this, goodness, I think ever since even undergraduate studies, I was interested in the dark side of businesses. Partly it was informed by my personal experience, kind of being a child in Soviet Union, and then how my family kind of, lost all their life savings pretty much overnight when the country collapsed. So it kind of stayed with me, I think, over time, this idea that, okay, why can businesses do this to their stakeholders and go unpunished? And what can we do as strategists or as policymakers to perhaps prevent that from happening, or putting some guidelines to ensure that this doesn't happen in the future? It wasn't, of course, that well formulated when I was a teenager, but as I started studying more and more, as I started my undergrad in Omsk State University and then transferred to Methodist College in the United States, I think that was something that still kind of informed my research interests. So when I was applying for a PhD program, I actually wrote that I wanted to study business ethics and unethical behaviors of businesses. So it was kind of a consistent, lingering thought in my process. I actually, a couple of years ago, revisited even my term papers in Omsk State University, and they were about repressions, like during Stalin's era, and how they affected not just businesses, but in general, kind of the social fabric in Soviet Union. So this dark side of businesses and how to alleviate that or prevent that, or at least turn it down a bit, has been a lingering theme, I guess, in my intellectual endeavors, I would say. And so once I got into grad school, so once I got into my PhD program, um, it started to deviate just a bit from the business ethics or unethical behavior into something that started becoming a more prominent line of inquiry, and that is organizational reputation or organizational celebrity. So it's less about tangible assets of companies, not about the factories we own or what type of equipment we have or what land does our company possess, but more about the intangible assets of companies. So the literature at that time in kind of, in the 2000s started looking into the importance of what stakeholders think about companies, right? Because you can see in the dot-com era, for instance, during the dot-com bubble, many companies did not have big substantive assets, yet they were evaluated by the stock market very highly. Many unicorns came out of that dot-com bubble. And the question is kind of, well, what was the substance? Why were investors so hyper and hyped up about these companies if there is no substance to them? And so that discrepancy between tangible assets and intangible assets is something that was coming about at that time. And that's where my research deviated or kind of went into the route away from ethics and unethical behavior into this idea of social evaluations of companies.
Yes, that was pretty insightful and very interesting kind of story that you had. So
I would agree on that. Actually, I recently read like there were a couple of pages in my book, like the economics book, Simply Explained. Guess you know it. So it was also about the dot-com bubble, and I also think that this bubble will is repeating itself with the AI era, I guess. So pretty interesting, I would say that those so that social stuff is forming the prices on the markets. So my follow-up question would be about your university. So you have been working in RISE since 2012, so 10 years so far. And how has working there shaped you and your research interests?
I think I have stayed true even throughout my career at Rice University to this idea of the importance of how stakeholders form their judgments and perceptions about organizations. The good thing about universities in the United States and in fact in other countries, some other countries as well, is that there is intellectual freedom. So when you become a professor, and especially once you become a tenured professor, that's the whole point of tenure is you have job security because you are free to explore whatever topics you want to study and you view as important, and the findings of your studies will not be held against you by your employer. And so I have still been digging deeper into the idea of how these social evaluations get formed, how companies can manage them. My more recent work delved into the idea of stigma and stigmatization by authoritarian governments. And so in that sense, I think I started even going deeper into the dark side of social evaluations. However hard I try not to go that route, but that's something that has been kind of evolving in my research interest. But again, to reiterate the point, it's still largely speaking about social evaluations of organizations. So in that sense, I don't think it has changed much. The only change you see over time in your career is that you start looking broader into other literature. So I had to look at political science. Now that I'm working on the role of punishment in preventing organizational misconduct or organizational recidivism, you have to look at kind of criminal justice research and so on. So I think as I matured, I guess, in my career, I started looking broader into what other disciplines have to say about organizational misconduct and wrongdoing that we as strategy researchers have not yet looked at.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Pretty insightful.
Yeah, thanks for the answer. The third question would be about the research at the university. So, how do you balance, for example, huge responsibility of teaching students while also producing the research? And here is another one. What is more important to you, kind of producing the research and producing some new information, or exploring, or already teaching the known stuff?
To the first point, that's pretty much professor's life as a tenured professor in what's in US referred to R1, so research intensive institution. You have to balance the two, and in fact, the emphasis on research, right? So your career depends on how impactful and how novel your research is and your research findings are. Having said that, well, at least I myself will not be satisfied if I just do mediocre job at teaching. Because you come home after a class, like you want to make sure you did well, you want to feel good after the class. It's wonderful when the students come up and say like, this was really cool, I've never thought about it that way. And so the way that I balance it, I actually view them as kind of self-reinforcing tasks. So I bring some of the research, in fact, sometimes even unpublished works that I just was exposed to at conferences, or something that I am working on with my co-authors, I bring them to the classroom, right? Because in the classroom, I've been most recently teaching professional MBA students. So these are people who are working full-time in companies in Houston, from medical center, oil and gas industry, investors, and so on. So some of them are getting to the kind of executive level. So they have great experience, ongoing experience. And so presenting them some of the early research findings is a good way to get insights from practitioners about whether they would be thinking about the same issues in the same way or not. And at the same time, they share their experience with me. That sometimes can inform how you think, how I think about my research ideas. So it is self-reinforcing, I guess, in that sense. And one doesn't kind of preclude the other, but if you do it well, I guess, or if you figure out how to do it well, it actually, the two can complement each other for sure. To the second question about, so how do I balance new research with teaching? Is that what, is that
Yes,
what,
exactly.
So that's, I think I have partly already answered that. So some of the new research ideas can come from while teaching, so from the students. Sometimes it comes from conferences. So one thing that I have not given up, regardless of how my career progresses, is attending academic conferences. It's such a great forum to learn about what's happening, what people are thinking about, what is the new and upcoming research, which has not been published yet. And so in that sense, that's something I can both bring to the classroom, as well as have those types of ideas inform and perhaps update my research ideas too.
Got it. Very interesting.
The next question will be more work-related, I guess. So you have seen many real cases of companies under fire. And what is one case that changed how you think about crisis? And what simple lessons should leaders learn from it?
Good question. I mean, sometimes that does happen when it's a phenomenon or one specific case that can actually shift the way you think in terms of the theory that you're developing. I would say this is a little bit older case, but it's a case of Toyota product recalls in the United States. So this was around 2009, 2010. And I've been teaching this case for a while. But I never thought about it until recently in a way that I will share with you right now. So if you remember, there were some problems with Toyota accelerator pedal. It will get stuck and drivers would not be able to stop the car. And there were some issues that were shared with Toyota by drivers, but they were kind of dismissed as this is a customer satisfaction issue. It doesn't get stuck, it works okay. It may be that for some drivers it feels like it's stuck, but it really doesn't, and it works. Until one big accident happened, which was recorded on a 911 line. So this is an emergency line, and it was recorded and publicized in the media. And the driver was a police officer who has experience in high-speed car chases. So you could not say, or you could not justify it by saying, oh, it's just a satisfaction issue. It was not. So everyone in that car died, and it was all recorded, and it became a huge deal. And that's what started the crisis for Toyota. And that's how I was teaching it. It's a case where you see the leadership of the company at the time sometimes stay quiet, and when they would speak out, it was justifying why this happened, and still kind of sometimes they even use what we call scapegoating. So they said it's the supplier of the pedals that's at fault, it's not the company's fault. So all these ways to manage the crisis were met with even more backlash from the public. And only in so the incident that I mentioned to you happened in September, I believe it was 2009. So only in the winter of 2010 did Mr. Toyota, the president of the company, actually show up in the US Congress to testify about this ongoing issue. So more recently, this case made me think that there is a difference in how crises are managed in different cultures. A lot of this research is Western-centric. A lot of this research comes with data from the United States, maybe some of it from European Union, UK, but we don't have a lot of information on how crises are managed, let's say in Asian cultures, for instance, right? And so this Toyota case is a great example because you can think of cultures, well, there are different ways to look at national cultures. One way I'm looking at them is shame, guilt, and fear cultures. And so Japan is an example of a shame culture, a culture where losing your honor publicly is the greatest way of punishment. And the greatest way, or the most effective way to address that, is by publicly apologizing and making the leadership of the company kind of the face of the crisis. It's a very severe type of punishment. Whereas in guilt culture, like the United States, the way to alleviate the crisis or manage a crisis is to pay for it, right? It's compensation usually. And so when you're mismanaging it, so in the case of Toyota, perhaps the US was looking for some way of compensating, but the company wasn't doing this, and they were trying to save the honor of the leadership. And so this whole time, several months, the leadership would not show up or speak publicly about it. I think that in a way illustrates the differences in cultures, and the effectiveness in management crisis. They'll also vary depending on the culture. So now I'm thinking through, and I'm working on a couple of papers that look at how the culture affects how the crises unfold and what types of punishment are viewed as most threatening, I guess, and what types of crisis management strategies are most effective across different cultures. This perhaps is a very lengthy response, but hopefully it gives you an idea of how one case can inform future ways to theorize.
No, that was a pretty interesting case, honestly. Never heard of that.
All right,
Thanks.
okay.
Yeah. Also have never heard about this way. So yeah. But my question would be about the ESG. I have seen that you teach a course at Rice, which is called ESG issues. ESG issues in strategy, right?
Mhm.
So, could you explain, like in very simple terms, what's the difference between ESG and corporate social responsibility? And so, yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's a newer term, but the idea here is that corporate social responsibility is, or that type of research is focusing on companies' responsibility to stakeholders beyond investors, right? And ESG has been kind of a more well-defined, more refined, and more recent term to look at how companies are responsible. So this ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance issues, right?
Right.
So it's not only to the society at large, it's responsibility and the effects of companies' actions on the environment. And here we're talking environment, not in the broader sense, but actual physical environment, climate change, and so on, right? And governance means actually how the companies are managed. So who is in charge of decision making, right? So it's a more expanded and more recent term that looks at how can companies be managed, how can the structure of companies be formed in such a way that for-profit companies have other responsibilities beyond just maximizing shareholder wealth, and how can these types of decision making be incorporated into the strategic decisions of companies?
Yeah, right, right. Um, Pretty got the idea. Um, mm, and also, here's the another follow-up question about the ESG. So outside of the academia, have you advised any like company or NGO or maybe some different organization on ESG strategy or and what change did they make you that you were very proud of?
So I have not been a consultant, if that's the question. I have not consulted any companies directly. I think the closest in my experience that I would come to this is through teaching in the classroom, right? Because some of the students later come back to me like through LinkedIn or just emailing directly to me and just saying that, hey, this concept that we learned in class was actually helpful in such and such situation at our company. It happens once in a while, but it's actually good to know that that was helpful, like whatever we covered in the class was actually helpful for their decision making. Another part, again, this is not direct consulting, but for the ESG class specifically, I have invited some speakers to my class, and some of them are from NGOs in Houston. And so I think it creates a helpful forum where they can be exposed to some of the lessons that we cover in the class, and kind of having that discussion with representatives from NGOs and students who most of them are working for-profit organizations to flesh out some ideas about the different or sometimes similar roles that for-profit companies and not-for-profit organizations may have in addressing certain broader issues in society, whether it's climate change, whether it's what's more pertinent for Houston is natural disasters, which are kind of the result of climate change, right? Like we have hurricanes coming through Houston, we have flooding and so on. So in different parts of the United States, and if we look across the globe, there are these what are referred to as like multi-million-dollar disasters, and they are becoming more and more frequent and more expensive. And so thinking through kind of creating that forum between NGOs and for-profit organizations to focus on what is their relative role, how to address them, perhaps how to prevent, but also how to help manage the society once those disasters happen. That's one example of when I think when the class is helpful and the forum is helpful for for-profits and non-profits alike.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Got that?
Mm-hmm. So my next question would be the last one for part one. So for an 18-year-old founder or CEO, what are three habits that he or she can build today to build reputational capital before they ever face a crisis?
Yeah, I always like those questions. What are the top three? What is the top five? I don't know if I'll tell you top three, but bear with me. So I think the most basic premise of reputation management is alignment of identity and reputation. And what I mean by that is identity is who you are, whether you're talking about your personal identity as like I am Safar, I am studious, honest, good friend, and so on and so forth. So it's how you define who you are, right? Reputation is what others think about you. So again, at the individual level, if you go around and ask your friends, family members, colleagues, whoever, like, you know, imagine you're conducting a survey and asking, like, what do you think about Safar? Ideally, what you think of yourself and what others think of you would align. So from the corporate standpoint, so from the company's reputation management standpoint, we can translate it in terms of, let's ask the leadership of the company, what do they think their organization is, right? So I don't know, they may say, we are a reliable partner, we are an efficiently run company, we treat our employees well. So whatever those elements, the important elements for the company are, they will kind of list them out. And then you will go and survey company's stakeholders, suppliers, customers, business partners, and so on, investors. What do you think about company X, right? And so ideally, again, the responses will be aligned. But what happens frequently, and we've run some of those exercises, well, not even exercises, it was more like a consulting projects for some companies with MBA students, there is misalignment. And so the first, I don't know if it's a lesson or kind of point to consider is this alignment between identity and reputation, or what some would refer to as just being authentic, right? So you need to not only declare certain values of organizations, you have to live by them. Because if you don't, the gap between your identity and reputation will only increase, and it will be only a matter of time before some kind of crisis hits you. Because if you declare certain values, but you don't live by them, chances are it will catch up with you and it will escalate into a really big scandal. In US, Enron is a good example of that company where I don't know if you guys use Wayback Machine, but it's a tool online where you can actually look at snapshots of companies' websites from decades ago, 10 or 20 years ago. And I use that as an example in some of my classes where we look at Enron's mission statement, for instance, and they say customer is their number one priority. They aspire to live by certain values, high values like honesty, integrity, and so on. But in reality, that was not the case, right? So eventually it caught up with them. Turns out there was some financial fraud in the company, and so it ended up in bankruptcy. And so that's an example of when, as this gap between identity and reputation increases, or the company leads inauthentically, it will escalate into something larger, like a scandal, or in extreme cases, a bankruptcy. The second point I would say is the importance of relationships. So to the extent that the company's goal, if we're talking about for-profit organizations, is to be competitive in the long term, right? So not just to make money this year and be done, right? That's the assumption. If the company wants to stay competitive, stay relevant for a long period of time, relationships become very important. And I mean relationships with a variety of stakeholders. Relationship with your customers. So how do they view your company, right? Do they think your product is high quality and reliable product? Do they think in some cases that your company lives by the values that align with their values? Same with suppliers. Do suppliers believe your company is reliable? Do they trust your word when you say, yes, I will deliver a certain product, or I will pay my contract by a certain time? Same with investors. Do they believe what the leadership of the company says in terms of its future prospects and how it's gonna implement its strategies, right? So those relationships matter, and especially they matter once the company has a bump in the road, let's say some kind of crisis like a product recall, because then these relationships will come into play. They will become the backbone for the company. And so some research suggests that strong bond can help you recover from a crisis faster. You're not going to fall as hard, and you're going to recover faster. And that's because of the history of the relationships you've built over time. This is, of course, with some caveat, unless the crisis is really severe and the consequences are really devastating. But for the most part, when we're talking about smaller crises with minor negative consequences, this actually will help you. I think the third point I will make is the importance of personal leadership in the company. So frequently, in general, kind of people tend to anthropomorphize companies, meaning that they think about companies as human beings. That's why in marketing, for instance, they use talking animals like M&M's talking to each other, or Geico. I don't know if you know that commercial of insurance company. There's like a talking lizard. So, or Michelin Man for the Michelin tires. So we tend to relate on a human level kind of to companies. So if you look at how companies are being discussed, people say, oh, I trust them, or they betrayed me, right? These are emotions that we usually use when we discuss people, but we tend to kind of extrapolate them onto companies. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's important, the leadership of the company is important. So the most straightforward way to relate to a company is through its CEO, right? And so in this case, especially for startups, I think that was your question so far. Like if I'm an entrepreneur, I'm 18 years old, I'm just starting a company, your personal reputation will play a huge role in how successful the company will be. Because unlike Coca-Cola's of the world, where the symbol and reputation is well known, for startups, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? You don't have that kind of relationship with customers yet. You don't have the track record of here's my identity, here's my reputation, this is what I've done in the past. So one of the most important assets you have at that point is reputation of the founder, reputation or the founding team, right? And so not losing sight of the importance of that connection between leaders' reputation and company's reputation, I think is the third lesson or the third point I would make.
Thanks a lot. It was extremely insightful. By the way, we will focus more on the second point about the relationships now, as we're moving to the part two. So reputation as a benefit and a burden, how stakeholders' organizational identification affects the role of reputation following a negative event. So I will briefly tell the main insight from the work, if I may, and then we'll move to the questions. What the work asks, so does a strong reputation protect an organization in a scandal or make the backlash worse? So that's the main question. And how the researchers tested it. So they looked at US universities, which is pretty interesting, that broke NCAA rules and tracked 10 nations the next year from two groups of people. So there were alumni who were identified as high identification people, and there were non-alumni that were identified as low identification people. And then high reputation schools were top ranked nationally, and they found mainly that reputation is a both benefit and a burden, and that after a certain violation, alumni or high reputation schools are more likely to stick by or even rally to their school up to a certain point, but non-alumni are harsher on famous schools. So the bigger the school's reputation, the more these outsiders pull back. When violations get severe, even loyal alumni start to reduce their support. So that's basically all. And I guess we will move to the questions now. So when a well-known organization slips up, why do its biggest fans rally or unite while casual observers punish it more? So why is that? And the next question, what is one move in the first 24 hours for the organization to make the best to speak up to both groups?
Yeah, I in terms of the second question, those questions like, what's the magic pill? Tell us that one thing that we should do. I wish it worked that way,
Yes.
but I'll try to tackle that. In terms of the first question, so why would alumni in this context rally around the organization? You already mentioned that, and the mechanism here is identification. What that means is that in some organizations, stakeholders define themselves through belonging to that organization. So the reason actually why we tested our ideas in the US university setting is because specifically in the United States, alma mater, or the university where you received your bachelor's degree, becomes a defining part of your identity. So people wear t-shirts and baseball hats, and they're proud to say, I graduated from such and such university. And it's especially true. Well, you can see that also in across different contexts, not just universities. You can see it in sports. like Manchester United fans, right? So it's a way to define yourself in social interactions through characteristics other than your individuating ones. So instead of just saying my race, my gender, my education, you define yourself through belonging to a specific group. And that's the idea behind social identification. When I say I am a member of a particular organization, this signals something to other people, right? And so that's the mechanism. So once you define yourself as a member of that specific group, that the actions of that group, the actions of that organization in this case, reflect on who you are and how you are perceived publicly, right? And so when you see these groups slip up, these organizations slip up, it can inevitably have some kind of negative spillover on how you are perceived by others. So if I am an alumni in my case, of a university that's going through some kind of scandal. So in our case, it was NCAA scandals, which is athletic scandals, where some universities used inappropriate tactics to hire student athletes, because again, in the United States, sports and academia are very closely tied together in universities. You can get a full sports scholarship to go and get your bachelor's degree, for instance, right? And there's a huge fandom for basketball and football teams. And so once I see that, you know, my university's sports team is going through a scandal, is accused of cheating or accused of unethical hiring practices or recruitment practices, that can spill over on me. And it's always difficult for most of us to hear something negative about ourselves, right? So we want to kind of push back on that, justify, say why that's not the case. And that's precisely why alumni at first rally around their organization. They want to help it kind of recover from this. They want to counter argue the idea that we are a bad organization. No, we're not. And here is why. I'll give you other examples of, you know, great athletes. And this is just, you know, sometimes it's justified as one bad apple. Well, this is just one instance. This is not pervasive in our school, right? So that way, these types of kind of actions that help alumni rally around the organization help preserve positive aspects of your identity, because no one wants to be viewed negatively. Well, most of us don't want to be viewed negatively. And so that's why we see that rallying around. There was a famous case in the United States of Penn State University where a coach was accused and actually found guilty of sexual harassment of minors. And so again, Penn State alumni in the very beginning rallied around the school. They said, that's not the case. This is our coach. We've known him for years. That's not happening. They're all wrong. Until the evidence escalated and the severity of the scandal became undeniable and publicly demonstrated that, you know, at that point, that inflection point that we see in our study happened in that specific case as well. And so that's why the rallying around. You don't want to be viewed negatively by outsiders, and to the extent that you build your identity as dependent on the identity of the organization, a scandal at that organization reflects negatively on you. And so you as an alumnus of the university would want to justify it, help it recover, kind of, you know, do something to avoid that negativity. In terms of what to do in 24 hours, I mean, the academic answer is it depends, right? Sometimes even a placeholder statement by leadership saying, we don't have all the facts yet, we're investigating, is good enough. So that illustrates that you are aware of the problem, you don't have all the facts yet, but you are looking into it, you're investigating, you're cooperating with authorities and so on. And so that shows some leadership. That when we're talking about in the first 24 hours, because some mistakes can be made where there's complete silence from the leadership. Understandably so, because usually your general counsel or your lawyers would advise that be quiet, we don't know anything yet, because anything you say now can be used against you, right? So be quiet, don't say anything. But from other stakeholders, including the employees, it's kind of it can be perceived as crisis of leadership, especially if you see media and social media running amok at that point and presenting their counter arguments or their theories and so on. And so at the very least, showing your face publicly, and at the very least making that statement, kind of a holding statement, saying that we are aware of the situation, we're looking into this, we will share the facts as soon as we have them, I think could go far enough in the first 24 hours of a crisis.
Insightful. So my next question would be outside of the universities. Who are the people who are identified as high and low identification, and what positions in society do they usually hold, and what are 2 to 3 behavioral traits with which organizations can identify what people are who, basically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we actually studied something similar in Catholic Church. So you may be aware that there was a huge scandal in the United States in Catholic Church child molestation scandal. So in one paper, we actually look specifically at Philadelphia Archdiocese, and in religion, you can also look at, you can call them highly identifying and low identifying stakeholders, but you can see Catholics who attend the Mass regularly. Every Sunday they show up to Mass, they're engaged with their church, with their parish, and others are what some scholars refer to as occasional Catholics. So they would come for Easter, Christmas, but that's it. So they still identify as Catholics, but they are not as involved with the organization. So this is another example of high identification and low identification stakeholder. And to your second question, you can observe that through their behavior, so frequency of engagement with the organization. If we take it to outside of kind of nonprofit organizations and look at for-profit organizations, we could see that, for instance, with people who buy Apple versus PC. So earlier on, when Apple was like this hyped up opponent to personal computers, people were really like, there was like a fandom for Apple computers and for back then iPods and so on. So in fact, even in their commercials, they would show how different they are from PCs. And so they actually gained some traction, and some stakeholders started even tattooing Apple symbols on their body. I mean, that's a big show of identification. So you identify as consumer of Apple, and that becomes a part of who you are. Another company that's done it is Harley Davidson. I mean, they have a huge following of kind of Harley fans who do everything Harley, buy Harley merchandise. So you can see it through their purchasing behavior. You can see, you can observe it through their engagement on social media, right? If the company has a website, or if the company has a Twitter account, X account now, you can see who are these vocal proponents of your organization. Chances are these are the high identification stakeholders. Mind you that there's also an idea of disidentification, right? So the idea where some can really hate and despise your company and be really vocal publicly about it. So that's that dark side of identification. So some people define themselves as enemies of an organization. Another example, I mean, the most obvious example is wars. During a war, there's our side and their side, right? And so people on our side are those who identify, their side is disidentify. So again, that can be seen in their behaviors in terms of how they engage with each side, what they post publicly on social media, for instance. So there are different ways. Again, for-profit organizations, it's purchasing behavior and behavior on social media. I think those are the two low-hanging fruit to identify which ones are high identification stakeholders and which ones are not.
Thanks a lot.
Yep.
So my last question about the work would be connected to social media. So nowadays, more and more people use social media, so there is that uprising trend. And if you ran that same study today, when the social media use increased a lot, so how would this amplification change the insider rally versus outsider dynamic, backlash dynamic, and would the effects last longer? What do you think?
I actually did run a study like that. It was published this year. It was about polarization on social media. One thing I would say is that, if anything, it amplifies these effects. Partly because of the way the algorithms work. So you tend to get information that is already aligned with your pre-existing biases and preferences. And so to the extent that you start showing that you are a fan of a specific sports group or a specific company, and Tesla is a great example of that. So in the early years of Tesla, you could see kind of people who were really using hashtag TSLA constantly, and so those were the opponents. But there were also hashtag TSLAQ, so kind of not the enemies, but opposition of the company. And they were saying that it's overrated, it's overvalued on the stock market, and so on. So you could see these two stakeholder groups kind of going in different directions. With social media, I think that's amplified. So once you express your preferences by watching specific videos or reading specific articles about a company, the algorithms will feed you more and more of that same type of content. And so your views will solidify. And that's why I'm saying that with social media, if we were to rerun that study, we will probably see even more polarizing and kind of a bigger amplification of those effects. In terms of whether it's longer lasting or not, I don't know. I can't answer that immediately without data, because again, it will depend on what type of scandals we're talking about, what type of strategies companies took in order to manage that type of scandal. But I can make a broader comment that with social media, collective attention gets shorter, because there's always this something new is happening, and the cycle of the news is very short. So if at the time when we were conducting our study, we could look at media coverage on a quarterly or annual basis, right, and see how does it change. The tenor of media coverage is what we would take. Like how, sorry, that's the other study. That's what Abror will talk about or ask me about. But you could see kind of press releases or media coverage on a quarterly basis or annual basis. Well, now the media cycle is very short. What's news today can be completely forgotten tomorrow, right? So perhaps in that sense, the effects that we see may be short-lived, but again, it depends on what type of crisis we're talking about, because things can spiral out of proportion really quickly now, much quicker than before, where companies had a luxury of, oh, in the next newspaper, we will have a reply to whatever concerns were published in this newspaper, and you have a week to decide on your strategy. Well, now you have minutes, because otherwise things can spiral out of proportion. So things are moving a lot faster. They are more volatile. So logically, that means that the effects are less durable. But again, it depends on the type of crisis we're talking about, because sometimes they can run amok and really fast.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. That's all by me. Now Abror will take on.
Yeah, so that was really insightful. But I'd like to talk about a different paper of yours, which is the Managing the Message, the Effect of Firm Actions and Industry Spillovers on Media Coverage Following Wrongdoing. And I'd like to briefly talk about it to the audience in like 3-4 sentences. So, Professor Zavyalova and her co-authors study what a company should do after a public mistake, and what to do when other firms in the same industry are in trouble. So, by using a US toy recalls, they find a clear rule: if you cause the problem, the firm has to. If the firm has caused the problem, it gotta fix it and show the proof. And if other firms messed up, and the and if other messed up and you're kind of clean, the firm is clean, the firm gotta say clearly how it is safe and different from others. So Professor Zavello also found that when many firms are in trouble, at once media attention kind of spreads out, And so any one particular firm gets a bit less negative coverage. Um, yes, that's pretty much the overview. And um, I'll like to go to questions. So sometimes the company did nothing wrong, but the industry is in trouble. So as I said, and the bad news splashes on the particular firm. So your paper shows that happens a lot. What are the moves that can help a company get clean and kind of say that we're safe and different from others without like sounding defensive? Yeah.
Right. So I'll just clarify some terms. I mean, you alluded to them abroad, but I'll just mention them so it will help us discuss the paper better.
Yeah, sure.
So basically, the types of actions that companies can take when they're hit with a crisis can be categorized into two. Some call them substantive and symbolic. In this paper, we call them technical and ceremonial, but the idea is the same. Technical or substantive actions are the ones who address the cause of the problem. Something happened, so in our case, it was product recalls of toys in the United States. There was something in the supply chain or in the facilities, manufacturing facilities, that caused the problem, right? So we need to, first of all, find out what caused it, who was responsible for it, and then address it. So those are technical or substantive actions. Or you could engage in symbolic or what we call ceremonial actions. And these are more kind of PR type actions. We will discuss, we will use rhetoric, we will maybe distance ourselves from the crisis, say how we are different from competition and so on, and deflect public's attention from the unfolding crisis, right? Other two terms that we use in the papers, and you already alluded to that, Aurora, is safety in numbers. The idea is that the more of your competitors are engaged in crisis, the less attention will be paid specifically to your company if you're engaged in it. And the other one is guilt by association. So it's a slightly opposite idea. The idea here is that as your competitors are involved in a crisis, people will start thinking maybe you have your hands dirty as well, even though there is no evidence of that. So you're guilty only by association, just because you belong to that industry.
Right.
They may find you guilty. So to your specific question about what should we do if we're engaged in a crisis, my answer will be specifically in reference to that paper is if you are guilty, so if there's evidence that the defects came from your manufacturing facility, technical actions will be the way to go, right? Immediately start investigating, start finding out what happened, start finding out how to address the cause, and that will help you get out of the crisis faster and communicate it with your stakeholders as well.
All right. So the next question would be, so sometimes troubles come from a shared supplier as well. So naming them could distance you potentially, but it can also escalate blame and keep the story alive, kind of. And the question is here that when should a company name the supplier and when is the could be a mistake?
Well, I guess the answer in a way is simple and easy and perhaps naive, but it's when you have the evidence that the supplier is at fault. So when if your investigations show that it's specifically that supplier that the problem is, and in fact in some of these cases in the U.S. toy industry, it was indeed suppliers. So for instance, one of the issues why the toys were recalled is because many of them had extremely high levels of lead, and the effects of lead on child development are really negative. They are long-term. You can't detect it on the day that the child plays with a specific toy, but there are some cognitive effects on cognitive development of a child down the road. And so some of these companies, for instance, found that the suppliers that they used to paint the toys underreported the amount of lead in the paint that they used. So on paper, you see the amounts of lead and everything is fine. It's aligned with US guidelines, but turns out it was a lie, right? So if you have evidence and if you know that that's the case, then you can say that, hey, we've conducted the investigation. We found that the supplier is at fault, and this is what we're doing to address this. We're either changing suppliers or increasing the standards and so on. Where this can backfire, even when it's true, is when you waited way too long. So the example I gave you earlier with Toyota scandal, for instance, the timing of bringing up a supplier who made those accelerator pedals was too long after the incident happened that people stopped believing the company. Whatever the company says, they just took it with a grain of salt and sometimes viewed it as a lie. And so the same case could be said here. So to the extent that the public is losing trust in your company, in your leadership, even if you conducted the investigation and even if you found the suppliers were at fault, sometimes it may be too late. And even if the facts point to the supplier's fault, the public can still view it as, okay, this is just another justification that they came up with, and I don't already believe them because these weeks and months they've been saying one thing and it was not also true either. And so the sooner the companies can conduct that investigation and find the facts, if that's true that supplier was at fault, the better it is. But the longer they wait with the investigation, the longer it takes to find facts, the more room and the more time they allow for the critics to create their alternative explanations and narratives around why that scandal happened.
Right, definitely. I was just about, I was just wanted to, my next question was about that, the timing of a recall. So yeah, but basically you just answered that if the company waits too long, that's the consequences will be very bad. So yeah.
Well, that's slightly different. The timing of the recall is another strategic decisions companies have to take, right? Because
Yeah.
there are different ways to decide, different reasons to decide to recall a product. It is costly for companies. Imagine taking all of your product off the shelves, or at the very least providing some kind of remedy for which the customer should not pay, right? Like that's costly for companies. So to decide when is the right time to do it is also a big strategic decision, because some defects can be known internally before the public even is aware of that. So the leadership should decide, okay, do we want to recall it now before it escalates into a scandal, or do we want to wait and see how it unfolds? Another reason could be that there are more and more reports in the hospitals about defects. So another case in this specific paper was that some magnets from toys were falling off. They were not attached properly. And so if kids swallow magnets, that creates digestive problems and sometimes can lead to death. Like it's a really big problem. And so as hospitals receive more and more of these types of data, they then escalated to the government to say there's something off with these toys because we had, an increasing number of cases where kids suffer from this type of toy. Again, once the regulators come back to your company, you need to decide, okay, we're going to recall it right now, or do we want to work with the government regulators and see maybe we can remedy this somehow. And then finally, it could be that people call the hotline of the company itself. The customers call and say, hey, like this is what's happening with this product, and the more of those types of tips you get, again, it's a pressure point for the leadership to decide, do we want to do it or not? So there are different ways that lead to the recall, but it's ultimately the leadership's decision when exactly to recall the product. And they have some leeway, some room in that.
Right. Got it.
Just to, yeah.
Thank you for all of your answers. That's pretty much it. I have no questions left.
So yep, I guess I don't either. Maybe like a couple. So I'm a future behavioral economics major, and I guess you could give me some advice on what to do now to improve my understanding of the field, like what to focus on.
Well, two things I would say. One is stay true to what you like to study, what excites you, because these projects take a long time to go through and to publish. So as long as you have this intrinsic motivation in the topic, it will keep you going, because sometimes, especially once you get rejection after rejection, criticism, negative feedback, it can be you can kind of drop your hands and say, okay, I'm done with this. But if the topic interests you, if there's this intrinsic motivation, that's what will fuel your interest and keep you engaged in the topic. So find the topic you are yourself interested in. And the second piece of advice would be look at foundational studies, whatever that topic is. Look at kind of the highly cited works in that area, and look at the most recent works in that area. Because looking at foundational, that kind of shows you what's the basement of the building, right? Like what are the key building blocks of the ideas. And looking at the most recent studies show you kind of what is this newest and shiniest thing that everyone is excited about, and it also shows where the literature is going, what questions the literature currently finds interesting. And so looking at both of those types of studies will help you know the foundations of that literature and also where currently the literature is going, so you can stay on top of things and know kind of the newest emerging trends in that area. And I think that should help you inform where you can make a contribution to the literature and where you can kind of have your stamp in the literature, how you can enter that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. We'll definitely do that. And a couple of questions about the feedbacks, I guess. So, did you like it? How was the format? Maybe you have some ideas or suggestions to change something into a better direction.
I don't have feedback because I'm not sure who your audience is. So if it's kind of up and coming PhD students or MBA students or just undergraduate students thinking of their career, I think my advice will depend on who the audience is. But it's been a pleasure to talk to you guys and to answer your questions.
So about the audience, so our primary purpose is to bring that highly academic knowledge to the masses.
Okay.
So like the stuff no one reads, and we present it in a simple way so that everyone can access that knowledge. So that's basically the audience who have the basic knowledge of economics, but like not that deep.
Okay.
I would say like it's mostly high school students and early college students, probably.
Okay. Okay. The format should be okay. I don't know how long their attention span is and whether they will be able to listen to the entire hour. So if it helps to do some kind of shorts out of this, or have quick Q&A. I know my answers were really kind of unfolded and perhaps lengthy, but if there's something like a blitz, like you just have quick question, quick answer, maybe it will be a bit more dynamic and will help them concentrate on just short periods of time. But I think a more in-depth discussion will be helpful, especially for college students who are thinking about next steps in their career.
Thanks a lot for the recommendations. We do appreciate that and your contribution as well. So that's basically it. Thanks a lot one more time, Professor Zavyalova, for joining us today. And the discussion itself was pretty insightful. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Sure.
Thanks
for your time.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.